HD Anamorphic 1080 1.33. Here we go. We're gonna click it. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so I just called up Mark because, hey, we're getting the vlog back together. And my mom and myself recently went halfsies on an anamorphic lens. So this is my first anamorphic lens, and I decided to go with the SIRUI, not a clue how to say it. The SIRUI 35mm anamorphic lens with a 1.33 squeeze. I think that's what that's called. Now, the reason I decided to go with the SIRUI 35mm is one, I personally just like 35mm lenses. I always tend to use my 35 before I use anything else, so I figured I'd go with this. So, what is anamorphic? The honest answer is I don't really know technically what that means, but I do know that it's gonna make my image kind of look like stretched, like it's wider, kind of like what you'd see in the movie theaters. Now, if you wanna get a more technical view on what anamorphic means, I highly recommend you go watch like Make Art Now or Potato Jet, or there are even channels on YouTube that literally specialize in just anamorphic lenses, so they can tell you all about it. So honestly, I'm very excited to just test this out. I think that this is gonna be so much fun to use once I get used to using it, and I think it's gonna be a good addition to the arsenal of equipment that I have for making short films, or really just any content that I want to have a more cinematic kind of look. I'm not really sure what that word even means anymore. Now, another reason that I went with this lens is because, as opposed to the types of lenses that you'd see on like a real professional movie set, those anamorphic lenses can be about, $50,000, even more, sometimes a little less. But this lens, these lenses are kind of trying to break into the more affordable side of filmmaking. And this lens is only $568. That's like a regular lens, as opposed to $50,000. So that's why I went with this one. So let's open her up and take a look. I have never seen something like this in my life. That's a heavy lens. So this is a 35mm 1.8 aperture. I'm pretty sure it doesn't do autofocus, and the closest you can get to your subject is 2.8 feet. So that means you need to stay 2.8 feet, almost 3 feet away from whatever you're filming if you want it to be in focus. Just look at that. Now all I need is for Mark to get here, and we're gonna test this bad boy out. Man, it's so heavy. Hello, Mark. Come on up. Yeah, so that's actually the sound we hear every time someone rings the doorbell.
You didn't get rid of this. It's not the season anymore. It's a holiday season.
We're coming for a pumpkin.
It's some H&M.
All right, Marky G. So we're here. We're at the place of the testing. Just flew the drone drone around a little bit, and we're gonna take this anamorphic lens out. Just make a little cinematic sequence. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
This is for Nux. I'll probably put like special effects in there or something like that. So I just edited this whole sequence together, and so far I'm really impressed with how the footage came out. I mean, one thing to mainly note is that blue lens flare that kind of happens across the screen. But I also kind of feel like because when I was filming, I couldn't see the unsqueezed image, I didn't really realize that I wasn't getting a lot of footage that could really show what this lens is capable of. So I decided that I'm gonna shoot some footage in here to really try and show off this lens a little more. I also wanna do a side-by-side comparison of a regular 35mm lens with this 35mm anamorphic lens, just so that you can see the difference, and also so I can kind of see the difference as well and get a little more of a reference. So let's go do that. So as you can see, there's clearly a big difference between a regular 35mm lens and the anamorphic 35mm. One thing that I personally noticed is the anamorphic just has way more room in its frame. It is definitely stretched. You can get more in your image, whereas when you switch over to the 35mm, it almost crops in. You just lose a lot more of that space. I definitely think it gives you the more cinematic look, especially when it comes to the lens flares. They looked awesome. I was really happy with how they looked. They definitely made me feel like I was watching a more cinematic sequence. So overall, I'm really satisfied with the SIRUI anamorphic 35mm, but if I had to give a couple critiques, there are a few. Something that kind of bummed me out is, like I said, this is a very heavy lens. It didn't really work well with my gimbal. I have a Ronin SC. Maybe it's time for me to upgrade my Ronin. Basically, my gimbal just could not handle the weight. So a lot of the shots had to be handheld, and I had to try to use like a warp stabilizer in post to really stabilize the image, because there's also no image stabilization in this lens.
Or I'm just bad at balancing my gimbal.
So my second critique would be that when you're filming with the anamorphic 35mm, in your viewfinder, when you're looking back at your footage, you're gonna see a squeezed image. So unless you're using a monitor that will unsqueeze your image live while you're filming, you're not really gonna know what your footage truly looks like until you bring it into post-production and you unsqueeze it in post. My third critique would be there's no autofocus. So for me, I'm somebody that I like to film and make short films by myself. Not all my short films, obviously, but when I'm trying to make a short film by myself, having autofocus on your lens is huge, because you can just set the camera down, sit in front of it, and it'll focus on you, where this one doesn't do that. And it's really hard to get the manual focus right when you're filming yourself. So overall, I'm satisfied. I'm happy with this. I'm looking forward to learning how to use this more, using it on more projects. I really like the look, and I think this was a really great first step into the anamorphic world. So that's my review of the SIRUI 35mm 1.8 aperture 1.33 squeeze anamorphic lens. It's so heavy.